Start recording, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let me begin. So, how politics destroys everything and what to do about it. You'll see in a few minutes why I came up with this title. Let's go. So, first, a study. So, there was a study done in I think 2003, which had liberal participants and conservative participants. And they were all given the same policy statement to read. It was a policy about welfare. And let's say it was a generous welfare policy. Everybody read the same policy. So you had the liberal participants, the conservative participants, and they were four groups, and each group was told something different. They were either told that the policy statement was supported by Democrats or that the policy statement was supported by Republicans. I think you can begin to imagine what might be happening. Of course, they were asked the degree to which they would endorse the welfare policy statement. The liberal participants, not surprisingly, endorsed that statement highly when supported by other Democrats, when they thought it was supported by other Democrats. Similarly, the conservative participants supported it highly when they thought it was supported by Republicans. Note, this is a generous welfare policy, and the conservatives are supporting it if other Republicans are supporting it. And just the opposite happens when it goes the other way. When the liberal participants read the generous welfare policy and they think it's supported by Republicans, they have low degrees of endorsement. And when the conservatives are reading the same policy and they think it's supported by Democrats, they have low endorsement. And it doesn't matter whether the policy that they're reading is a generous welfare policy or a stringent welfare policy, you get the same basic results. That's dramatic. And that tells us an awful lot about the way in which we're positioning ourselves as political people these days. And this is probably forever. When we identify with a valued ideology, we're for us and we're against them. No amount of information really matters when that happens. We use our reference group, we use our identities, we don't want to be seen as the other, and we support the bottom line, the promulgated ideology. How can we become more for each other? That's one of my questions. Okay, point two. Let's take a look at our adversarial politics. Our adversarial politics. Forms of government. Well, we know that there are different forms of government. We've got authoritarian governments. We've got hierarchical governments, as in China. We've got monarchies, and we have democracy. Democracy, of course, is the worst form of government, except, of course, for all the other governments that have been tried from time to time. And you'll recognize that quote by Winston Churchill. Democracy is messy. Democracy is slow. However, one of the things that democracy does well, or has done well, is it replaces war with adversarial politics, with debate. Instead of war, we engage in debate, we engage in voting, we engage in deliberation. People get into Congress and they debate amongst each other. And this is, strangely enough, an adversarial politics. It's an adversarial process. War is an adversarial process, but that involves violence. Democracy is allowing us to replace violence with a different form of adversarial exchange, except at the symbolic level of discussion. But adversarial democracy requires a set of shared political values. It requires a shared vision of what the nation is about. It requires faith in democratic processes. It requires rule of law. It requires compromise. It requires respect for the other person's position and for the other person as a person. It requires the agreement to a peaceful transition of power. And all of these are being deeply strained. Our shared political virtues are being demolished over time. The very virtues you need to have a democratic process. And so we get this. Look at what's going on in college campuses today. That's an actual photograph, of course. So what should we do? Well, one thing we can do is try to restore traditional political virtues. Can we get back what we've lost? Well, that's a legitimate question and it's a legitimate process. Well, let's look at that. Can we restore traditional political virtues? Well, let's go all the way back to the first election between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. I don't know if it was the first election; it was one of the earliest ones. One of Thomas Jefferson's people referred to Adams as that hideous hermaphroditic character. Not a particularly appealing thing for some to say, especially if we are looking back romantically at our traditional political virtues. Maybe they weren't so traditional after all. We've got Jackson and Adams, the son Adams this time. Jackson would call Adams a pimp, and Adams would call the Jackson, who was divorced, a polygamist, using the values of the day. Of course, we had the Civil War, a tremendous period of intense violence that some would say are still going on in some version today. And of course, the 1960s were a time of great strife. We had riots, we had violence, and we're seeing some similar remnants of that today. So perhaps the problem is maybe not the political virtues, although that are in decline, but maybe it has something to do with the very structure of adversarial politics itself. And that's where I came up with the title of this talk, How Politics Destroys Everything. The more I look at politics, the more I look at politics through the lens of conflict resolution, which is what I want to talk about as we go on here, the more I see that what people are doing in politics, in adversarial politics, is not the ideal form of debate. In a debate, you're supposed to give each other your best, and you're supposed to put your ideas in front of the marketplace of ideas to see which ones rise to the top, which are the best ideas. We're not doing anything like that, and maybe we never have, because what we're trying to do is to not create solutions to problems. We're trying to win. We're trying to beat the other person. Adversarial politics is a zero-sum game. My gain comes at your loss. It's like football. I gain. Whatever I gain, you lose. By definition, we can't win at the same time. Without shared political virtues, adversarial politics dissolves into doing whatever's needed to win, attacking and defending, polarization, solutions that favor one party over the other. I win, you lose, you lose. Misrepresenting and dehumanizing the other. And what we have now, intensive gridlock. This is the situation that we're in now. Can we do better? Perhaps, we often think of our situations of the day as finally developed. They're in their final states. Capitalism is the best we can do. And we can't, for example, have a better version of capitalism. Democracy, this is the best we can do. Maybe not so. Maybe our institutions are continuing to evolve, and maybe they need to continue to evolve. I want to suggest that that is indeed the case. What if we move from an adversarial democracy to something that might be called a more collaborative democracy? Now, I am not naive. I don't believe that voting is going to be going away at any time soon. I don't think the debates are going away anytime soon. I'm not even sure that they have to. But I am pretty much convinced these days that without some form of radical restructuring of the way we think about each other and the way we think about the adversarial process, we're in for some trouble. How about politics as conflict resolution? Politics is about power. Politics is about solving social problems, social conflict. We know a great deal about conflict resolution, about how to engage in conflict resolution. What if conflict resolution were seen as a means for political processes? I want to suggest that there's two ways in which this could take place. Politics is collaborative problem solving versus politics as adversarial battle. What we've done is we've done some studies. We did a study for a year and a half, and we had 6 people Six people from different political persuasions. We had people who were on the left, people who were on the right, people who were in the middle, libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, people who supported, at that point, it would have been Clinton or and some who supported Trump when we did this. And there are two basic phases I want to talk to you about how it is that we can solve political problems without resorting to winner take all adversarial politics. The first focuses on meeting mutual needs, meeting the needs of both Republicans and Democrats and libertarians and socialists or whomever it is that you want. We don't normally think of politics as a matter of meeting needs. We think of it as a matter of demolishing the positions of the other side and advancing our own. The other basic phase I want to talk about is reconciling ideologies, two basic ways of problem solving. And you'll see that in a few minutes. Let's start with meeting mutual needs. What does that look like? If we were to engage in this process of meeting mutual needs, what do? Instead of battling over positions, you identify the needs that motivate clashing political positions. And then you try to find ways to meet the stakeholders' needs simultaneously of all stakeholders. Instead of pitting one set of interests against another, you try to solve both at the same time. And when you do that, more often than you might think, I say, you find that the needs are not necessarily incompatible. And I'm going to try to show that today. So here's an example. So position one, position two, I want the death penalty. Position two, killing is wrong. Instead, if you have that position, that debate, it's going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Instead of arguing over positions, what if we were able to create ways of discourse in which we look at the unmet need behind the position? Behind each political position is an unmet human need. He's got a human need. She's got a human need. What you do is you seek out those needs. Well, she's got a need for redemption. She wants to be able to rehabilitate people. She wants to be able to see that that there are alternatives to believing that human life is sacred, perhaps. His needs, safety, maybe other types of needs. He wants to keep the public safe from people who commit heinous crime. Well, what do? You bring those needs to the surface, and then you forget about the initial positions because you're going to have new ones. You start with needs rather than positions, safety and redemption. And the question becomes, how can we have safety for the public and redemption at the same time? Is that possible? And then what you do is you come up with possible solutions to meet those needs. You just brainstorm solution over time. And then after you brainstorm solutions, you try to create shared solutions, not one against the other, but shared solutions for mutual gain. This is a basic conflict management process. When this happens, it's possible to create common ground. Common ground is created, it's not simply found. And in a few minutes, I'm going to give you an example of how the group of 6 people that we worked with created a massive set of agreement for the issue of capital punishment. So that's collaborative problem solving, the first phase of this process. Now, let us look and be very serious about this. There's a prerequisite to this process, and I will not apologize in saying it. And some people might find it to be naive. Some people might find it to be pie in the sky. Some people might find it to be over idealistic. I do not. Without apology, instead of arguing over positions, this approach requires something akin to empathy. Empathy for the other side. Empathy, yes, for the Trump supporter. Empathy, yes, for the Biden supporter. Empathy, yes, for the Chinese. Empathy, yes, for the Israelis. Empathy, yes, for the Gazans. Empathy, yes, maybe even for Hamas. Reach inside, understand the world from the way that person understands, even if you don't agree with it. Try to experience it from the other point of view. Connect to the human need of the other. If the other's position is born of some need, well, connect to that need, no matter if you don't understand it and can't appreciate it or don't agree with it. because they just might reciprocate once they feel safe enough to be able to express themselves. It requires seeking the good in the other. The good in me, if you will, salutes the good within you. Finding the good in the position of the other person, bracketing your own beliefs, which is very hard to do, bracketing your own anger, your own pain, your own suffering long enough to see that of the others in the hope that that will be reciprocated. That's what it requires. And that's the shift. That's the hardest thing, I think. Now, that's collaborative problem solving. We can get a long, long way, I believe, if we can connect to the needs of the other and try to find non-ideologically based ways of meeting each other's political needs. But the problem here is that can only bring us so far. In political problems, the needs that people have are often ideologically driven, even ideologically defined. What do you do then? So here, you got two people, you have their needs. Those needs motivate their different political positions, which clash. I just showed you one way to deal with that. But it's not enough because those very needs are going to be organized, at least in part, by ideology. This person has one ideology, the other person has another. And those ideologies influence, structure the needs themselves. So focusing on needs is good. Can only bring you so far, I think, at which point you have to look at ideologies. What can you do about that? Well, you can begin the process, very long, very painful, very difficult, of reconciling ideologies, at least partially. Here's how. Through the process of ideological engagement. You find the kernel of truth in each party's ideology, and you try to construct novel, partially shared beliefs. So each person has their own ideology. Those ideologies generate positions, they're contrasting political positions. Seek kernels of truth in the other. So she's going to ask, is there anything I can believe in this other guy's belief system? As much as I squint, I have to squint. I might have to look hard. I might have to ignore a lot. Is there anything I can agree with? And he does the same. And at that point, you can begin the process not of creating an entirely new ideology, but partially shared novel beliefs. It's a start, I suggest. Yes, this is possible. Let me show you. Example, capital punishment. People disagree in the United States on this issue very vehemently, and the people in our group disagreed very vehemently. First thing we did was we engaged in a process of collaborative problem solving. I taught people how to do it, and I mediated the process. But the very first step, take a look, is not to have a debate over capital punishment, whether it's right or wrong, good or bad. That's not the problem. Capital punishment is a solution to a problem that's not been stated. Namely, something like, how can we respond to heinous crime? A problem, the first step of solving a problem is representing the problem. If you represent it as a battle of positions, you're debating solutions to a problem you haven't even identified. How can we respond to heinous crime? Second, we do that. We can begin to ask, that's a definition of heinous crime, when someone commits a heinous crime, what are our needs? This is collaborative problem solving. Well, our group came up with a whole bunch of different needs. The need for justice, just deserts, vengeance, or consequences. The need to keep the public safe. The need for preventing the crime to begin with. The need to understand the origins of heinous crime. The need for fairness in the criminal justice system, so that if people are going to be going through the justice system, that there is fairness as a result of race, gender, etc. We have to address the pain of victims' family. All of these needs at the same time. So what did we do? We engaged, we identified what the problems are, we identified what the needs are, and then we started to brainstorm. How can all these people together, are there possible problems, are there possible solutions that we can come up with all of these various needs, preferably all of them at the same time? And the group, I cannot tell you in specific, but I can give you an example. I can show you that the group came up with massive consensus about what they could agree upon to deal with all of these things. And here's some of them. Here are some of the shared solutions. One, first was keeping the public safe. Well, how could you do that? These are things that everybody agreed upon: imprisonment, life imprisonment, rehabilitation, if possible. Everybody agreed in the need for a prevention. They agreed that there was some need for socialization of children, fostering moral understanding in children, teaching restorative justice to children, teaching boys and men to self-control, addressing conceptions of masculinity, teaching people how not to be victims. They also agreed that there were systemic changes needed in society to change the problems, including a national discussion of values, early childhood intervention, healthcare and mental health systems, economic security. All people were agreed on this. There was an agreement that there was a need to understand the origins of heinous crime through research. There was agreement to try to find fairness in the criminal justice system, fair procedures for incarceration, to deal with issues of race and socioeconomic status fairly, to reorganize police values, to train police and community skills, to adopt a team and partnership approach between the police and the public, to treat prisoners as people, to eliminate profit for prisons. And there was also a need to address the pain of victims' families to help build restorative justice for those people, to make amends to victims, to show self-transformation, show that the perpetrator was able to transform him or herself, perhaps even to develop strategies of grieving and forgiveness that would help the victim's family. And then there was also the tough one: justice, just desserts, and consequences. People agreed with prison, restorative justice, even some form of public shaming people believed in. But, and that's massive as far as I'm concerned. Look at all of the stuff that people agreed upon. We don't talk about what people agree upon because we never have forums, I believe, for people to agree upon. We simply talk about solutions that we disagree with. But that only brings us so far. There's still, after all of that, there's still disagreement, ideological disagreement. Here are some ideological disagreement. Here's an example of ideological disagreement between Maureen and Cliff. Maureen believed in the inherent dignity of all persons. She believes that some people have diminished responsibility in predisposing conditions. She believed that people are capable of redemption. Capital punishment does not always make victims whole, and that capital punishment makes us all killers. Cliff disagreed. He believed that some people are evil, irredeemable, that heinous crime required justice or revenge, the balancing of the moral scales, that perpetrators should get their just desserts. They need to have some balancing of the moral scales again. People must be held responsible, and victims need to bring justice to those perpetrators to get closure on the problems that they face when they lose someone to death or some such thing. So what do you do about this? This remains. Well, let's take a look at ideological engagement. We start with Maureen, and we ask Maureen to consider Cliff's ideology. Maureen, is it possible that there's any kernel of truth at all in Cliff's statement that some people are evil or irredeemable? And we're going to go through it. We went through each one of these in our sessions over long periods of time. Let's take a look at what happened. Here's just one exchange. Here's Maureen, here's Cliff. Maureen and Cliff. Cliff says, some people are evil, they're irredeemable. Maureen says, this may be true, but it's very rare. But this idea of saying that it's true, at least very rare, violates and is in conflict with her belief that people have inherent dignity. All people. Geez, what am I going to do with that? This leads Cliff to say, there are people, psychopaths, who kill without empathy. This conflicts with Maureen's belief in the inherent dignity of all people. It's hard to find inherent dignity with somebody who kills without empathy, she begins to think. And believe it or not, led her to begin to modify her position on the inherent dignity of all people to the inherent dignity of almost all people. may not seem to you like a big change, but that is a religiously held belief. The inherent dignity of all people was a Unitarian Universalist belief. And to have someone begin to shift that idea, whether good or bad, whether you think it's good or bad, is a change at the very least. This person continued to struggle with this process. I'm not going to give you more examples of this, but I will show you that there are many more. So some people are evil, irredeemable, says Cliff. Maureen modifies to say there's inherent dignity at least of almost all persons. There's a change there. And then we went to Cliff's second belief. Heinous crime requires the balancing of the moral scales. And then I'm not going to go through this. I'm simply going to say a similar discussion went on where changes were made in Maureen's thinking. Yes, I believe that there must be some consequences to actions. I don't like calling it revenge. I like to think that there's consequences that are needed, but it's not going to be done out of revenge, she suggests. And we continue. We continue. Maureen was able to see that for her way of thinking, Ellie, another person in the group, talked about the effect of parole on victims' families for people who were incarcerated with capital punishment, the threat of capital punishment. And the idea was that it caused great pain for the families of parolees. Again, Maureen said, she grabbed to see, I haven't attended enough to victims' needs. And this again conflicts with her own beliefs. And she comes to the idea that anti-death penalty advocates do not adequately address the needs of victim families. Now she's going to want to begin to do that. Now, after we do this, we switch turns. We take a look at Maureen's beliefs, and Cliff's going to look at hers. And there's a whole process that takes place. I won't go through it, but I'll simply say that it exists. So what happens? At the end, we come up with a joint set of solutions that everyone agreed upon. There was still disagreement, but here's all the ones that we talked about before that came about through collaborative problem solving, and then shared beliefs amongst the group, shared ideological beliefs in the inherent dignity of almost all people. Some people do have diminished capacity and predisposing conditions. Perpetrators must be held responsible, at least subject to their capacities for control. There's a need for consequences of heinous crime. Not agreement about what those are, but there's at least need for consequences. Many, but perhaps not all perpetrators are capable of redemption. There's a need to address the victims of families of people who have had victims of violent crime. Capital punishment may make some victims whole, but not others. I want to submit to you that which you see before you is not nothing. It may not be the solution to capital punishment because there's still some disagreement here, but we don't do this. That is an awful lot of agreement, an enormous system, a system of solutions that meets multiple needs at the same time. Is it possible? Yes, I believe it is. This is, of course, a self-selected sample, a sample of people who at least believed that this was possible, done in Massachusetts, a state that is a relatively liberal state. I would imagine that even the conservatives in this group were perhaps less conservative than in other places, but maybe not so. Can this study be criticized? Of course it can. Again, I think that there's something that is not just simply trivial here, though. How to move forward. Again, I don't think we're going to see the end of voting, the end of debate, the end of deliberation in Congress, a consensus-based model. Those things are very difficult. But I do think this. I do think that there is a possibility of change, and that change comes not immediately at the global level, but at the local level. Think globally, act locally. What if people can learn, I suggest, how to engage in these types of conflict management processes, to make them part of their everyday lives, to make the prime directive of compassion, credulity, curiosity, care about the other, even the other that you don't agree with, that right now you think is crazy and stupid and out of touch and even evil. If we could begin to promulgate and expand these types of ideas, I believe that we get attitude changes, and people can bring these into their local spheres of influence, into their families, into their organizations, into their classrooms, into their friendships, into Facebook, if that's possible, into their local decision making in organizations, into their local political structures, in their local politics. And if people begin to make such changes over time, that they might ripple, that, yeah, Congress has to vote, but they can do an awful lot before they vote to begin to address each other. If you can find a way to begin to put ego aside, begin to see the other as a person, begin to restore the virtues and values that I think have been dissipated over the past 60 years or more. That is what I have to say. And so what I'd like to do is to stop sharing my screen, to shut up, and hopefully to invite you to have a discussion. If you'd like, you can put comments in the chat. I'd like to be able to uh, have a discussion. If you have questions, please ask. But what is more interesting to me always is not so much the questions, but a discussion. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If we can engage each other, that would be wonderful. And so, again, you could put something in chat, or you can simply speak up.
Hey, Mike, it's Chris Fusey here.
Chris, I would love to see your face, but it's okay if I don't.
Well, no, you've seen my face. You really don't want to see it, but I'll put it on here just in case. Oh, terrible background. So anyway, the reason I'm wanting to speak up is you said it a couple times about being able to have that meet people, see them as humans, etc. And you also talked about dehumanizing. So for me, that's where most of this starts because we've dehumanized each other so much. I don't know how we get past that. I'm looking for how we get past that because it's no matter whether you're in a football field, a baseball field, no matter where you're at, the other team, they all suck, they're terrible, they're whatever, they're evil, etc. Did your research come up with anything about the dehumanizing?
Yeah, a lot, in fact. Let me, well, before we had the exchanges that I showed you about, Maureen and Cliff engaged in a debate on the issue. I'll just simply say it didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. It didn't go anywhere. And, Chris, I think we know a real lot about how to not dehumanize the other. And it's the relationship, stupid. We have to be in relation with each other. We have to have dinner with each other. We have to, how is it that gay marriage came about? Didn't come about through some principle. It came about because people who were against gay marriage found that their nephew was gay, or their nieces were gay. The people that they loved were gay. They found what's his name? Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis, one of my heroes, a black soul singer who seeks out members of the KKK and has conversations with them and treats them as human beings. And then they find out that he's a human being, and they bond and they become friends. And he has KKK robes in his closet, believe it or not. Jonathan Haidt, in his most recent book, says about cell phone use in kids. He says that's destroying the kids. And he's saying we should stop giving the kids cell phones. And so then somebody said to him, "Are you crazy? That genie's left the bottle." And he said, "No, actually, there's only one problem. There's only one problem. That problem is people don't believe you can put it back in. They just don't think it can happen. You change the fact that people think it can happen, it can happen." And that's what I believe. I believe that if we can take the message if we can do it ourselves and be, oh God, I can't believe I'm going to say this. No, I'm not going to say it. You know what I was going to say. I'm not going to say it. If we can bring our own way of being into the world out into the world and influence our spheres of influence, I think we have a chance. Is it going to happen tomorrow, Chris? No, but it can happen, I believe. Alicia said, start with kids. Um, I think she put that in the box. Yeah, start with kids. We don't do that very well at all. We really have to have, in my opinion, conflict resolution right from the start. And as an atheist, and I am an atheist, and I am an atheist's atheist, I believe we need some sort of shared values, shared virtues, some sort of religious something or other that we can believe in together. We've restored, we've entered into ourselves, we've retreated into ourselves rather than retreating into our relationships. We need a new way of thinking. Monique?
I agree very strongly with the idea that it's going to require starting young, because I think so many adults are taught, if you're starting at your very initial principle of like meeting or recognizing unmet needs, many adults refuse to acknowledge that they have needs, and that acknowledging needs is perceived as a weakness or puts you at a disadvantage to other people, and that it's hard to imagine, say, putting our political leaders in a room and talking about unmet needs. It just seems like that's not something that anybody who has been raised in our current culture is going to be able to do, or that it requires starting with creating the kind of safe space
Yes.
that makes it possible for people to do that kind of self-exploration or be that vulnerable. And as much as I love what you're saying, it feels so daunting to me to think that that's, like, I guess to me, it feels like we have to start. I worry that there's like no saving the current grown-ups. And that's probably a really pessimistic position, but I feel like maybe it's going to require starting with the young, and then hope that over a couple of generations, maybe the whole culture will change. But not to be a downer, but that's sort of my,
I can't believe that any
concern.
wouldn't have those concerns, especially today. I have always been very, very, you know, the right has been very effective in saying unpopular things that have used to be anathema that are not anathema anymore. If you will, they've shown the possibility of how it is that taking unpopular positions, if you will, can ripple through. Well, why can't we do it on the other side as well? I mean, it's possible. It takes courage. It takes courage. It takes great courage.
Yeah.
Michael. Michael, I think that you're what's it called? Muted.
Sorry. Let me try to start by stating my need here. So I've had what I consider the good fortune to have had 2 trips to Cuba in my lifetime. And I just want to share what I observed and to hear your reactions about what to do with these observations. And it fits on, Monique saying it's too late for the adults and we have to start with the children. And I would say, it may be too late for the adults in the United States, but not all adults function politically like adults in the US do. And shortest version of what I learned about the political system in Cuba, which is a one-party system, is that in every single workplace and in every single neighborhood, there are a series of ongoing meetings that a much larger percentage of the people at the workplace or the residents participate in than vote in the United States. And those processes are very similar to the creating common ground process, in that people each share their concerns. They try to hear one another's concerns. They try to brainstorm solutions. And then afterwards, they consensually choose someone who they think can represent, who will do a fair job of representing all the perspectives at the next level of dialogue, which may be a city or an industry-wide group. And that process continues. Now, I don't know how decisions are made, like when Fidel Castro was dying, that his successor would be his brother, and how the decisions are made about who Raul Castro's successor would be. I'm sure there are egos involved in that. I'm sure there are what we call politics involved in that. But this is a system that gives people that kind of formative experience as I witnessed it, of trying to create the best ideas. And then somebody, some ministry of the government, has to look at the product as delivered by the representatives of all of these groups and reconcile them. And again, I haven't observed that process. I don't know how they do it. But I was thinking about the dehumanization. Did I see any dehumanization on either of my trips to Cuba? Well, in the second trip, I don't know if you'd call this dehumanization, but people did see tourists as a source of economic benefit. I don't think that's a radical or dehumanizing idea. I think many communities in the US that are supported by tourism see tourists as someone, a source of money. But I just, my reaction is that for 65 years, the biggest obstacle to this experiment succeeding has been US government policy towards Cuba. And I just, what are the obstacles to at least saying it's worth seeing how this experiment plays out? What are the ideological? What are the needs? What's in opposition to seeing more how this works and how it could work and where it doesn't work and how to fix those problems? That's my question to you.
I would love to be quiet. I have plenty to say about that, but I prefer to have someone else pick up the mantle if that's possible. As people are waiting to pick up the mantle, which I'll stop talking.
Iris's hand is up.
Iris, do you want to address Michael or do you want to say something different? Iris? Certainly, Michael, it seems to me that fear is at the root. It's the fear of in Cuba, dates back to the fear of communism and the ideological clash. And the love is the opposite of fear. Love is the antidote to fear. That sounds hokey. That sounds ridiculous. But we don't look at the needs of the other. We don't look at the perspective of the other. We're afraid of it. Is it possible that we could look at Cuba, for example, without fear? Without fear, or without, what's the word I'm looking for?
Prejudgment.
No, the opposite. Both without fear and without giving in. Both. We don't look at Cuba as some romantic other, but instead, Iris, you're on. You're not muted. We don't look at. I suggest we don't look at Cuba as a pariah, and we don't look at Cuba as a horrible enemy. We look at Cuba as another system, as a possible of someone that we can learn from, as a possible someone that they can learn from us, as possible as someone who is committing something that is wrong, atrocious, as the possibility of exposing something that is wrong and atrocious about us. Something, with deep openness on both sides. it's that fear and it would, what Monique and I think Chris was referring to, that we've got to get through very, very early to find a way to get around. That's the best I got, man.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Iris, please go.
Okay. As a victim of the castrification or Cubanization of Venezuela, as a member of the more than 6-7 million of Venezuelans who have fled Venezuela because of the influence of the horrific Castro regime, I have to say that yes, tourism has brought money, but these circles of conversations only serve to control the population. We have them in massive ways in Venezuela, and everything is controlled. You get money to buy food because there is no food, people don't have money. If you vote for the party, if your position is the one that is in agreement. So I love what you said, Mike, but Michael, I completely disagree with your understanding of what is happening in Cuba. And regarding what you said, Michael, I just loved that you started with empathy. That's the first step. I love that you talk about starting local to make an effect. And I just hope that this can be practiced in the wider society too.
Okay, thank you. So I hear that there is a reality behind what I see that I'm not aware of, that that what seems to me like solution-focused discussions are really kind of just entertainment for the people to help them tolerate the control. Did I understand that? Others?
I'm no expert. I'm just a victim.
You're no expert. You just what? I'm sorry.
I'm not an expert. I'm just, and my family too, who now lives in, I don't know, 8 different countries. We are victims, not experts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My hope would be that something like the exchange that just happened between Iris and Michael, that it were possible to continue such an exchange in such a way that each party is open, not totally open, but is open to being wrong and learning something, and is open to teaching the other person. It seems to me that openness and not romanticization or self-protection, it's what's needed in order to move. And the absolute start, again going back to Monique, of making the other person feel safe, and therefore acknowledging the other person's pain and suffering, the suffering of the Venezuelan people that you're talking about, Iris, is a precondition, it seems to me, to be able to ask anyone who feels as though they're suffering to listen, and vice versa. David, you want to say something? You're on mute.
No, I get you. It's a little off turn, so I don't know how much time we have. It'll be okay for
Go
a
ahead,
minute.
Guy.
Well, and this is something that I've been struggling with the last day, and when you mentioned the college, so I'll tell just kind of a brief situation, and I'm struggling how to respond, but essentially, during the part of it, my daughter was down protesting and handing out waters and peaceful protesting, and I had seen video after video of groups, police people, chancellor, uh, hoarding towards the protesters, fights, um, and having things broken out. And at the same time, um, an old friend on Facebook shared a picture of a fraternity, and you may have seen this picture of them rescuing the flag from touching the ground or being lowered by some protesters. And fights ensued and things like that. But they posted on Facebook, they posted a GoFundMe, and everybody said that's how men should act. And they said that for doing that, we want to throw a kegger like we all deserve. And I don't know if anybody saw this, but they basically raised over $500,000 on this GoFundMe. And I and I knew about the fight, so I wrote this person who I've known for 30 years, who I know to be a very, very good person. But he's probably on the other end of the spectrum as much as I'm on the other end. But I know he at his heart is a good soul. But I'm trying to struggle with how to respond after I kind of got the flamethrower mode out of me. How do I respond to this person? Because he goes, this is my group of people. How do I, tell me more about what's going on? And so I'm trying to figure out how to respond to him in a way that, with some kind of empathy, but also and understanding who he is, but also how do I get my point across to help shape these guys to that they're valuing a symbol over human life and human safety, and particularly of their fellow college students. And so it's how do I, that kind of thing. So that's a real live situation that I've been dealing with the last few days. So,
Absolutely. The GoFundMe raised money for what? What was the money for?
a keg party.
Oh,
Yes, that was the stated, and then they followed up with an apology letter that said, "Oh, it got out of hand. We didn't mean for this, but we're going to distribute the money in accordance with what the donors would have wanted," which kind of takes the wind out of their sails, saying, "Oh, we didn't mean to," because they must have known what they were doing if they understand what their donors were paying them for. So it's very problematic, I think.
I
But
know that you're not asking for advice about what to do, and I'm not going to give
I'm
it.
trying to figure out how to shape an
Uh,
answer that continues a dialogue and helps him kind of navigate and hope to provide advice to that group.
I just want to say what comes to my mind when I think about it. And that is that I'm imagining that what you're saying about is that these young men who wanted to have a keg party for not letting the flag hit the ground, they must have been not supporting the Gazan protesters. The only thing I think of when I think about that is, and I hope this doesn't sound too harsh, I don't mean it this way. I actually mean it in a compassionate way, that these are boys who are rejoicing in the triumph of a certain kind of masculine ideal, if you will. They're basking in the moral superiority of their triumph, and I would look at it and I feel that it's naive. But and I look at it, I know that for me, if I were to talk to those people, that I would get nowhere unless I in some way was able to understand and acknowledge that masculine bravado.
Right.
And then what's the normal course of attack is to attack that. You dummy, you dope, you idiot, you toxic masculine person, rather than seeing it for the ignorance, perhaps, I don't know, that it might be, and then stating one's own needs without invalidating. And I think that when that happens, positive things can come. One's own needs being the empathy that you might have for the Palestinian people, or even to be able to validate what you can find, what one can find, the kernel of truth in what those boys were experiencing. Even though we may disagree with it. I can certainly agree and understand and recoil from broken glass. Right. See that someone would respond to that, and I can repudiate that at the same time. Praise the cause for compassion for those who are being murdered in Palestine.
Thank you.
Yvonne, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
My hand is brown, so I didn't know if you saw it.
I
had a little thought about the need to punish people who do heinous crimes. I was thinking of that movie, I think it was Papillon, where there's these men who've been exiled to this not really bad island that they've done horrible crimes and they are going to be there for life. And I was thinking, when you think of what would make the public safe against people that everybody agrees have done something so horrible that they couldn't be freed. And I was thinking, what if there were really nice places to exile people for life? And you begin to develop in society, almost like you think of God punishing someone, and the idea is you must not get involved and you have no right to ever lean into that. You just step back and let God punish. And so you could put really dangerous people on a said island, and you could have people that would deal with them to rehabilitate them to some degree. But similar to those people who finally realize what they've done before they're given the death penalty, they're not going to get off the island. They're going to stay there apart from society, but maybe you just would treat them a lot more humanely. And I was thinking that makes people safe. If they ever escaped, maybe they wouldn't be so inhumane, but it did have like some punishment to it. It was just this image that I had, but absolutely people could not go there and harass them or harm them. But that's where they would live out their life.
That's a piece of thinking outside the box. That it's you know, it seems to me you're addressing a whole bunch of seemingly contradictory needs and values all at the same time. You know, there's a sense of punishment to it, and there's a sense of exile, but there's also a sense of restoration, and I think that whether what you think is good or bad, we got to have the freedom to think it and to put it out there without fear, because that's the only way we're going to get novel ideas, and that's a novel one. Papillon, man, wow. Kevin, I'm mindful of the time. I want to respect people's time. But so let's just have Kevin and maybe one more, if we can. I'm happy to stay afterwards if people want to. Kevin, where are you? Where did you go?
I'm here.
There he
I'm
is. He's
here
right in the
talking.
middle of my screen. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm just gonna build on what you were just talking about, Mike, and responding to David's quandary that he's dealing with. And I was just gonna really emphasize what you were talking about, validation. So to be able to acknowledge and validate what those boys or what really matters to those boys. Like it sounds like what really mattered, saving the flag or showing loyalty to your country and honor to your country. And then, yes, celebrating, that's what they want to have the keg party to celebrate it and, revere that. But what is, if you can acknowledge and validate the deeper meaning that they were getting at, what mattered to them, because if you can do that, then they will feel heard and understood. And once a person feels heard and understood, it lets them know that they matter, which then in turn lets them know that they are valuable. And in our brain, value translates to love. And I think love is one of those basic needs that, Mike talked earlier in his presentation about needs. And I think this need for love is what is really not being met for our entire species. That's a whole nother talk. That's a whole nother topic. But validating, and just because you acknowledge and validate somebody's need or passion or what's important to them doesn't mean you agree with it, but you see it. And people need to feel seen, heard, and understood.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me that when you were speaking and when Yvonne was speaking and when David was speaking, it's interesting to me to feel the reactions that I had inside, the negative reactions that I had to kind of acknowledge and see and then stop and then do exactly what you just said, which was, can I find out what matters to this person? Can I find out? Because that's secondary. The first thing is I want to lie. I want to state my own. So, and love is hard. Love requires strength.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to love others when you didn't learn what it feels like to be loved
Mm,
first.
mm, mm, mm.
And I think this goes back to what Monique and I were talking about a little bit in the chat, is starting with the young kids, and I would even say starting with infants, and I would even say starting, in the womb, but let's just say day one of when you come out. If we're not connecting emotionally to each other, and we are not able to receive that love, and we don't learn what it feels like to receive love, then that's kind of driving most of our behaviors, in my opinion, and based on what I've learned over the last couple of decades. That's where I'm coming from.
We tend to think that we are rational animals, that we make decisions on the basis of our thinking and our cognition and the rest of it. Well, I think that we forget that thinking is secondary, and that it relies on
Very secondary.
the primary process of emotion and social
Yeah.
relations. The emotions that are developed in social relations, and particularly love, is absolutely central.
Right. And it's pretty well understood through the neuroscience now that 95% of our actions and behaviors are subconsciously driven. So it's only 5% of our actions and behaviors that are coming from our frontal lobe, but we like to think that it's 100% from our frontal lobe, but it's not. So.
Chris, I'm going to give you the last official word.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No.
No, I love this conversation because in some of that, looking at some of the side conversations here, we're talking about this, and what Kevin said, from the day we're born. From the day we're born is how we process, we start to get our everything, our values, our everything that we are as adults. That happens the day we're born. So if we could change it starting then, because then that's our heuristics, and we all have our heuristics, and we all judge each other based on what we see in our own values. So if we can suspend that in some way, thinking about this dehumanizing, which I'm kind of stuck on, thinking about this dehumanizing, I mean, just a couple of ways: separate the person from the behavior, talk about the behavior separately from the person, talk about people without using adjectives. You stop describing people using race or color or religion. If somebody's walking down the street, how the hell do I know if they're Jewish or Catholic or whatever? I have no clue. So unless we know that kind of stuff, we need to start separating from the behavior from the people is the way I see it. But going back to what David said, I really do believe it starts at a very early age. And even in the chat, I said, it starts, our values and everything starts from the day we're born. So I really love this discussion because I think it has everything to do with what we need to do. And it's starting the conversation. I appreciate you for doing it, Mike.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chris. I'm so happy to see you. So, thank you. People, please, I would like to extend an invitation. Take a look at the website, Creating Common Ground. You want to write something? Please propose something. You want to join and try to build something? You want to build a conflict resolution program for children? Mary's beginning to think about that. You want to, you got ideas? Let's see what we can do. Let's promulgate them. Let's put them out there. That's the big thing. Thank you so much. We are going to try to have these conversations more often. I'll stick around if anybody wants to stick around, but I'm gonna close it for now, and say I hope to see you again soon. And thank you for coming. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Miguel, thank you for coming.
I'll stick around if anyone's sticking around.
Yeah, stick around a bit too. And hello, Yvonne. Long time no see.
Hi, Mike. Where are you living now?
Well, right now I'm in Portugal, but I'm coming back to the US next Sunday.
Wonderful. In Lisbon, where part of Portugal?
Yeah, just on the other side of the river from Lisbon, like Cambridge is to Boston.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
But we miss you here too.
What?
We miss you here too.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to being around.
Is it tomorrow now in Portugal?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Thank you, Michael, for staying up late.
Well, it was worth it. Like, this was a wonderful presentation.
Great. I'm
I
glad you.
think, I mean, I hope I didn't lead the discussion astray, but you named the problem, you spelled it out, you spelled out all the rationality for it, and you left us with how could politics be different. And I don't think the only way is to start with children and hope that the next generation survives. We have to look at, well, that's what he said. Who's working now towards creating the kinds of contexts where there's more of what there isn't in US politics?
People are so afraid. People are so afraid to speak.
You're right to name it that way.
Yeah.
Well, and we talk about fear a lot, but what are people fearing?
I think people fear that they're not going to say the right thing and their jobs might be tied to how they have, what is their view. And they just don't
So
want to
job
say the wrong
security,
thing.
they
Yeah,
could be fearing job security could be
yeah,
something. And
yeah.
then what happens if we lose our job, then we don't have income. And in the world that we humans have created, if you don't have income, then you're going to struggle to have food, which we all need.
Mhm.
You're going to struggle to have shelter, which we all need. Depending on where you are, you might not be able to get water, which you need that every couple of days.
Yep.
So these are basic survival needs.
Yeah. But these kind of groups where people make their own small group that already decided to agree are really good because that's not scary. And you know that at no time would Mike be Muscola or Michael Bassages be led to sell what we said for some extra money because it's all a group that agrees. So
the
there's some hope.
intentions and the expectations are
Yeah,
set and agreed upon.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's what I love also when I attend Mike's groups, how people are in different time zones, right? Where some people woke up just to come to the Zoom, and that feels so connected. That
Right.
is so cool.
Yeah, that's like high motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was someone from Philippe Marisov. I can't remember where he's from. I think he could be from Serbia or something. I can't remember. Yeah, so yeah, that's good. It feels good. Yeah.
I don't mean to harp on my point, but hearing David's example, for when Castro came to the US in 1960, asking for the support of the US, he came to the United Nations, but he asked the world for support for their experiment. For the US to have been afraid of Cuba would have been like the kids David was talking about being afraid the flag would touch the ground. It was a purely symbolic threat until the US drove Castro into the arms of the Soviet Union, and then they created that threat.
But it sounds like that symbolic threat,
Can mean so much to people.
it's their identity, their identity, their value as a human being. And again, if we don't feel valued, we're not really feeling loved. And not feeling loved, again, I will argue, is a basic human need, as basic as air and water. And that's going to drive behavior, which we see in David's example, or in the Castro example, and just so many other examples, throughout history.
Yeah, but I wonder if
Following up on, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to ask whether in your treatment of ideology, in this model, whether there's a recognition of what Kevin's saying about how much of a need people's ideology fills for them and what it would be like to be stripped of that. And they really rely on that to feel love, to feel a sense of
Belonging, right?
to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so is his ideology important to deal with just because it sometimes gets in the way, or is it a need that we're really asking people to step beyond that and solve problems?
Well, I think that I'm going to answer your question a funny way. People like Richard Dawkins believe that science can answer all of our problems. Well, he's wrong. All science can do is tell us what is. We need to know what ought to be, what should be, and this is a realm of human belief. And our beliefs are what make us who we are. So the ideologies, everybody has to have something to believe in, it seems to me. That's exactly what we're talking about. That the beliefs, our moral stances define who we are. So I don't think it's something we can take away. We don't want to get rid of them. We get rid of them, we get rid of ourselves. We want to transform them. David actually introduced me to this quote by, was it Michael White, David? Is that his name?
David White,
David White.
the poet.
And the quote is something like, no self should be able to survive a good conversation. So if a self is defined in part by an ideology, then when I have a conversation with you, that self should be enhanced, transformed, changed in some way, not taken away.
Mhm.
We can't eliminate our biases. We can reflect upon them and make them better through our relations with each other.
Mhm.
Me.
Mhm.
Yvonne, when are you going to write something for me?
I was thinking, there's so many great ideas. Every time I come to one of, there's another fantastic idea. I think
I was so struck
I
with the
should start, just write down notes and just start. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's
Well,
just that you and Michael are so far ahead of me. It's kind of, it's daunting.
I don't think
like-
that's true. I don't think that's
Because
I'm like,
because I am longing so much to catch up on what you've been thinking in the years since we saw each other.
yeah.
I really would
I
look
was so
forward.
taken with what you said last time. It's never left me when you were talking about race and you said, I want to know what you think. I don't want you to not see race. I want to know what you think because I have to be able to position myself in relation to you.
Or if you think something wrong, you might be a person who immediately lets it go if you were just free to say it and then have the other person challenge it. But if you are not allowed, what can you do?
Right.
I really like that idea too.
It's so important to me. Yeah. Okay, good people. I'm going
Okay.
to
Thank
end
you so
now, and
much.
I hope that we will see you again in another month soon.
Absolutely.
Michael,
Thanks. It was a lot of fun,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
meeting you, Kevin, you, David. Take care.
Likewise. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, good night.
Bye.
Well, when I get what do you call it? The chat. How do I get that? Should do the chat itself.
Yeah, it's you, there's a feature that'll save the whole chat for you and put it in we'll put it in a little file for you.
Okay, so that's that.